All right, everybody, let's get this program started. Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Lunchtime Discovery Series. It's good to be with you for another edition of our program. My name is Chris Smith, and I will be your host today, as I normally am. It is good to be back here with you. I missed last week, but many thanks to Aaron Apple for jumping in, guest hosting the program. I heard that y'all had a fantastic conversation with Aaron and Dr. Gagne last time. I'm going to have to go back and check it out and watch that one. That's a good reminder that you too can also go back and watch any of our previous Lunchtime Discovery Series programs, because they're all archived right here on the museum's YouTube channel. They're all in the same playlist labeled Lunchtime Discovery Series. We got smart about it. And you can go back and watch, I think there's more than like 100 of these programs that are there. So take advantage of that resource. Lots of good learning that you can do. Interesting people talking about interesting things from all over the world. So go check that out. It's a great resource that is here available to you for free. Now, these programs are organized and put together by the Office of Environmental Education, and then we run them out of the Museum of Natural Sciences here in downtown Raleigh, working together to bring you all of this great content. And we are fortunate because we have really great people here in North Carolina who are doing really interesting work, cool stuff out there in disciplines all across science and nature, conservation, education, art, even more. And I'm excited for today because I guess we could say that today's guest is a friend of the Lunchtime Discovery Series. Dr. Kelly Oten, this is not Dr. Oten's first time presenting as part of this series, but to my memory, every single time has been great. We've learned awesome stuff, and I'm so excited to bring you all Dr. Kelly Oten today. Now, Dr. Oten is an assistant professor and extension specialist with the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources at North Carolina State University. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for being here.
Hey, good to be here. It's always a good time, and hopefully I can wow you again with my topic today.
I'm looking forward to it. Last time we talked, you were with the Forest Service, you reminded me.
Yeah. I spent 8 years with the North Carolina Forest Service and our Forest Health branch, navigated the many forests of our state by foot, by car, by canoe, and even by airplane, monitoring the health of our forests. So shifted positions a little bit, shifting into extension work and research, starting an extension and research lab here at NC State, and I'm loving it.
Well, that all sounds very exciting. And I am excited to learn more from you today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for having me. I like being an extension. I like having some interesting titles, but so you'll have to pardon my rudimentary photoshopping there with the good, the bad, and the bugly. But I couldn't resist. I love a good pun, even if my Photoshop skills aren't quite up for it. So this is kind of an adaptation of a presentation I gave to a group of forest landowners. And the whole premise is behind, the role of insects in our forests, and when to really worry about insects being on trees, because insects play a very important part of our ecosystem. There are some good ones. There are some ones that we may consider bad. All of them are bugly, but really, when do you need to worry? When are insects something to be concerned about, or something that you might dub pests? But before I get into what those pests are, it's important to remember that even though some are good and some are bad, all insects are awesome. And I think a lot of people, especially if you're tuning into this series, you can agree. I am particularly biased. I grew up loving entomology. This picture on the left is from when I was in kindergarten. And when all the other little girls wanted to be, Little Miss Muffet or some other nursery rhyme, I said I wanted to be the spider from Little Miss Muffet. The picture on the right there, I went through 4-H, and my main project was entomology. So I encourage you also being an extension. 4-H is a program out of extension. I really credit 4-H with getting me into entomology. Well, I always loved bugs, but it showed me that entomology could be a field and a lifelong passion, and here I am now. So if you're not in the same boat as me, where you love insects, since day one as I did, then let me convince you just how awesome insects really are. First of all, insects are everywhere. There's virtually no ecological niche where you can't find insects. I used to say you can't find insects in the middle of the ocean because there's salt water, things like that. But recently there's been publications where there are insects living on that big trash, the floating trash island in the middle of the ocean. So really insects have adapted to occupy almost every single ecological niche in our nation. One of my favorites are the ice crawlers, these group of grilloblattids. They're wingless insects that live on cold mountaintops or on the edge of glaciers. And most of them cannot tolerate warmth. They have to stay at a very cold temperature. And if it gets even up to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, they might succumb. So really cool how they've adapted to almost every climate and every ecological niche. They're also really diverse. Insects are the most diverse group of species of any living organism we have on the planet. So this is a pie chart showing the number of species per living group. And you can see overwhelmingly, insects dominate the number of species that are out there. As being an entomologist, we often get pictures. Sometimes they're black and blurry. Sometimes they're very good. People asking you what these are. And you're like, there's over 1 million choices as far as when it comes to species of insects. But that's also one of the cool things about them. Anytime we make a blanket statement about an insect, as far as characteristics, there's almost always an exception to the rule. So insects are very cool because of this diversity that they have with so many different species, somewhere between 1 and 2 million currently, with many more projected undescribed. Insects are also very abundant. Approximately 1.4 billion insects per person on this planet, which is wow. If you look up figures for how much they weigh much more than we do if we add it all up, even though they're much, much smaller organisms. So they are just very cool. I hope you're wowed by those statements as well. One of my favorite quotes is credited to E.O. Wilson, the father of biodiversity. He said, "If all mankind were to disappear, the world would regenerate back to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse into chaos." So not only are insects very awesome, they're also very important for our environment, for our ecosystems. They play such important roles. But even that being said, insects get a really bad rap. A lot of people think about insects and just think that they're a nuisance, think that they're stinging, think that they're gross. They don't want them in their house. But when you look at all the species, all of those insects that people tend to have issues with really only make up less than 5% of those species. So it's important to keep that in mind, that even though, there's, many people, include all insects as, being pestiferous, really a very small portion of them actually are. But when we say the term pest, there's also, nuances there. What really is a pest? This is one picture I like to show. If we were live, I would say, raise your hand if you think this is a pest. Depending on the group, a lot of people do raise their hand. They say they don't want it in their house. They don't want it on them. They don't want it near them, which is fair. The spiders play a very important role as predators, keeping pest populations low and things like that. So they do play very, very important roles. Similarly, a lot of people might think that spiders are cute. So that's why, depending on the audience, I get very different hands raised. If we think about other insects, ladybugs, for example, they play very important roles in gardens. They feed on aphids or other soft-bodied predators, predaceous. Some people purchase and release ladybugs in their garden to act as biological control agents. But some of those species that we've released on purpose, specifically the Harmonia species, which is native to Asia, comes into people's homes during the winter. So one insect that can be beneficial in a garden, in some cases, in some situations, may be considered a pest. So it's not just the insect itself or the species itself, but it depends on the situation, where they are, and the person's tolerance level. Some people are fine with spiders being in the house, and some people may say, oh no, to me, that's a pest. This is bothering me and I want it out. But the whole point is, this is all based on human definition, right? So whether the insect is attacking a crop that we want to eat, that's a problem, and we would call that a pest. Whether it's in our house and being a nuisance to us, that's an urban pest, but we would still call it a pest. So when we think about insects in the grand scheme of ecology, it's important to remember that insects are just doing what they're meant to do. And it's our presence that really is what puts the definition of a pest on them. So the way I like to phrase it is, in the absence of humans, an insect outbreak or an insect problem is simply an ecological event. So these side-by-side photos here, there's a pine tree on the left, that's a sugar pine, it's killed by a mountain pine beetle. This one dead tree in a forest isn't a problem. This is natural. Insects are doing their thing. Typically, bark beetles, pine bark beetles attack trees that are stressed, weakened, and dying. So they act more like the vultures of a system and not the lions of a system, so to speak. But if you have one tree die and it's in the middle of a park in this big city, people enjoy it for all of the benefits it provides, whether it be, stormwater runoff, shade, a gathering point, green space, cleaner air, all of the above. That one tree dying has a much bigger impact. So the insect that killed the tree on the left, we probably wouldn't consider it a pest as part of an ecological niche, but the insect that does it on the right probably does, simply because of the impact that it has on humans. And that's really where the rubber meets the road as far as the definition of a pest. But again, I'm going to go back to the many roles that insects play that help maintain forest health. One of the most important things that insects do is they are very important parts of the food web. They are very important for birds feeding their young birds every spring. Many animals feed on insects, many birds, many other insects, even reptiles, amphibians. Insects are very, very important in the food web, and without them, the food web would likely collapse. They're kind of that linkage between our green food and our living animals. Another important role that insects play is pollination. Now, here's the European honeybee, but we do have a lot of native pollinators as well that play very important role, not only for our cropping systems, but ensuring that our trees reproduce and produce viable seed. Of course, decomposition. There's termites on a log. There's so many stats out there saying how much debris would be in our forest without the decomposers, and not just termites. There's beetles, there's fungi, there's other organisms that help break down all of those woody debris that are in our ecosystems. Insects, or at least at this point, hexapods, because this is a picture of small springtails. These are soil-dwelling hexapods, but they're very important for soil health, as are many insects. And so they feed on detritus, they feed on plant roots, they stimulate growth, they improve soil quality, etc. So they're really important for soil health as well. But they're also important for keeping other pest populations low. This is a really good example of natural biological control, where we have a clarid beetle, the red, white, and black beetle you see there, killing a southern pine beetle, which is a very bad pine bark beetle. It is considered the worst pest of southern forests. But we do have a natural predator that keeps the populations low, and it is that relationship that we look at to determine or make predictions about whether or not southern pine beetle will be a problem in the coming year. So I've already said, insects play a really important role in forest health. My position title is, I specialize in forest health. But one of the things that is asked a lot, and people have a lot of different answers to, is what is a healthy forest? So the way I like to look at it is that a healthy forest is one that has the ability to sustain the unique species composition and the ecological processes that exist within it. So as long as those species composition remains somewhat the same, somewhat balanced over time, trees can die and regenerate, and the ecological processes that are supported by the forest can continue to exist, and we would generally consider that a healthy forest. So looking at this aerial photo here, can a healthy forest have unhealthy trees? Absolutely. We expect that to happen. Trees get stressed. They may get attacked by pathogens, by insects, but losing trees does not mean that an entire forest is healthy. It's when we have an imbalance where we see an unhealthy forest created. So why do we need healthy forests to begin with? Obviously to support the animals and plants that live within those ecosystems. Some of the insects that attack trees that we're going to talk about or mention today attack what we call a keystone species. Those are species that define the ecosystems that they're in, the hemlock being the prominent example. And with the loss of hemlock, we see cascading impacts on the environment. It's also really important in maintaining a healthy environment and the processes that it provides. Ecosystem services are really important for how we function as people, using clean air, clean water, all of those things. And then, of course, we can't, ignore the fact that forests do provide accommodations for us as people. Whether it's for supplies to build our homes, firewood in the winter, a place to recreate, a place to hike, a place to go camping, things like that. So these are things that directly impact you. We as humans are generally drawn to trees. We like having them near us. I think as species, we value green space. So keeping healthy forests healthy is really important for all of those aspects. But there are a lot of things that can threaten a healthy forest. I show this graph a lot, or not this graph, but this image a lot, showing a lot of the different things that can impact tree health. So these are a lot of different tree stress agents. The biotic or living stress agents are on the left side of the tree, showing disorders, animals, which does include insects, my favorite, microorganisms, which include a lot of the pathogens, and then some plants. And then on the right side of that tree is where you see the abiotic issues. So weather events, whether it be hurricane, ice damage, lightning, injury, if someone, injures the roots of a tree with a lawnmower or a weed eater, things like that. Toxins, we see, radiation, pesticide drift, things like that. Soil, whether it be compacted soil, and imbalance in pH, things like that. So lots of things can impact how healthy a tree is. And often a lot of these things come together in a decline and ultimately result in the death of a tree. So you might be asking, if I focus on forest health, why is my interest primarily in insects? Well, it's not just because they're the coolest. We've already talked about that, but it's also because they're the most important agent on this image. In fact, insects kill more trees every year worldwide than any other forest menace. This includes pathogens. This includes wildfire. Insects kill twice as many trees every year as wildfire does. Now, wildfire has its own issues because it can threaten people's homes and lives, obviously. But as far as it coming to healthy forests and trees, insects are the biggest threat. So if you own forest land, or if you're a homeowner and have trees on your property, it's really important to make sure that you're keeping tabs on the trees that are on your property so that you know when to worry about those insects, when to worry about diseases that might be threatening the health of those trees. So now that might lead you to the question, well, when do I need to worry? And that's why I tell you, let your tree tell you. Now, obviously, trees cannot talk like they do in Wizard of Oz, one of my favorite classic movies of all time. But they can tell you in other ways, and that's primarily through the signs and symptoms that they develop while they're stressed from a stress agent. So one of the things we recommend is to look for things, look for what your tree is telling you. And one of the best things to do is look up. A lot of issues present or the symptoms develop and cause the decline of the canopy. Now, this image shows particularly an ash tree declining over time from an attack by the emerald ash borer. You can see number one there, you have a very healthy canopy. And then over time, the tree is declining. Now, you don't want to be calling someone when your tree is at number 5. If you're out there checking your trees, letting your trees talk to you regularly, looking at those canopies and seeing a decline in the health, then hopefully you realize something is amiss around number 3. And at that point, there are solutions available to you. In this case with emerald ash borer, there are pesticides that could save your tree if you decide that aligns with your land management objectives. But if you're calling someone for help by 5, then it's going to be one of those issues where there's nothing left on the table to do. So look up. Don't just look at your tree, but look up into the canopy of the tree. But don't ignore the bottom or the main stem also, because a lot of issues can manifest there as well. Look for developments on the outside, whether it be sawdust. We see ambrosia beetles as they bore in, they push out something called frass, which is a mixture of boring dust as they bore into the tree and their excrement. We might see exit holes. That middle picture is the emerald ash borer. That picture on the far right is sooty mold. So it's this dark black growth that happens or that grows on honeydew, which is an excrement of sucking insects. So if you see this dark growth on your tree, then that might be telling you to look up. You might have aphids or scale issues on your tree. You can see all of these signs and symptoms are manifesting pretty much at eye level for the most part. Not always the case. Some of them happen much higher up, but there are some things to look for at the main stem. If you have a pine tree, we see pitch tubes develop if there's bark beetles. So as the bark beetle bores in, they will create, or the tree will try to push it out with its sap, and that sap dries on the outside of the tree. So even though bugs come and go, not just when they're done development, but seasonally, or if they're inside the tree, they still leave evidence behind. And so really you're just collecting evidence by looking for all of these different things. Another thing we recommend is look down. So look in the canopy, look in the main stem, and look down. You might see fruiting bodies from pathogens at the main stem. You might see what looks like sawdust gathering around the main stem, which could be from different types of boring beetles. Right there, that is sawdust around the base of a pine tree, either from pine sawyers or ambrosia beetles, but that can tell you something is going on with your tree. So that being said, you will not notice these signs and symptoms developing on trees unless you're looking often. So get out there, walk your woods often. If you have a small plot, check your trees often. One of my favorite things to do is take pictures of trees that I've planted over time, not just to see how they grow, but so that I can go back and compare them over time and see, if new signs and symptoms are developing. Is this a new thing or has this been there for a while? One of the tools that we have available to forest landowners is this app called the Healthy Woods app. And for those that are less familiar with different things to look for, they can download this app, create a profile, and basically create a profile for their forest. And this will walk you through step by step how to look for different things in your forest, where to take pictures, how to document changes in your forest over time, so that if something does happen, you can realize that it's a deviation from the norm, and then maybe seek help, maybe seek assistance from someone who might be able to offer some guidance as to how to respond to the changes in your forest or on your trees. Now, as of right now, these are current now, and who knows, next month we might have a new threat occurring in our forest. But I have put up, or these are some red flags that I generally like to say with our forest. So basically, there's a couple of instances where you can almost expect issues, and that's if you have ash or hemlock trees. Ash, because we do have an invasive insect called the emerald ash borer. If you have ash trees on your property, you can expect emerald ash borer to either already be there or be there soon. And if you do not treat it with a pesticide, you will in all likelihood lose your tree. Same thing with hemlocks. We're talking about hemlock woolly adelgid. We've had this insect for a lot longer, so most people with hemlocks are well versed in this pest. But same scenario, if you have hemlocks on your property, if it is not treated, it will likely succumb to the hemlock woolly adelgid. The other red flag that I like to say where you can expect issues are overstocked stands, particularly with pines. And that's because when stands are overstocked, they compete with one another. They don't get the water, they don't get the nutrients, they don't get the sunlight, all of those resources that they need to thrive, to be healthy and combat some of these minor pests and diseases. They just don't have those. So overstocked stands are something that we are concerned about. This is the emerald ash borer right there that I just mentioned. Typically, you don't see the adult unless you're looking for it. You see the decline in the canopy and then those D-shaped exit holes. And then there's a picture of the hemlock woolly adelgid. As far as overstocked stands, if you are a landowner and you have pine that you think is overstocked, I highly recommend seeking out the Southern Pine Beetle Prevention Program. There are tools and there are resources and programs available to you to help you reduce that stocking level so that your stands aren't as threatened by some of these big issues, primarily Southern Pine Beetle, but other bark beetles and other issues as well. We also recommend in forest land to follow your forest management plan. And if you don't have one, to get a forest management plan, contact a consulting forester or contact your North Carolina Forest Service. They can create or help you create a forest management plan so that you know what to do and you have a plan going forward. And then you actually follow that plan. So you know when you want to do a thin to reduce the stocking density of pines, things like that. There's a whole website online if you're interested in the Southern Pine Beetle Prevention Program. But in a nutshell, it helps with the cost of reducing or doing a pre-commercial thin in pine stands to reduce the impact of pine beetles. Another thing that we've been seeing more recently with high level storms happening, we've had a few big hurricanes in the past 5 to 6 years. We've seen some big wind events, things like that. Post-storm assessments and cleanup has turned out to be pretty important because even if you have trees standing that remain, if a tree is damaged or fallen, then even most species like black turpentine beetle, for example, which needs a stressed tree to attack, sometimes the populations can build up and then they will overflow into those remaining healthy trees. So it's always important to kind of be on top of your A game right after a storm. As far as landscape trees, we highly recommend maintaining proper tree health. Prune it when it needs to be pruned. That helps air circulation, reduces fungal pathogens. Mulch it. Not only does mulching retain soil moisture, but it also makes sure you don't have to mow or weed eat right up against the main stem so you don't damage it, things like that. Also choose the right tree for the right site. Choosing the right place to plant a tree is so important, and choosing or planting it correctly is also really important. There's lots of guidance online if you check out our extension websites about how to plant trees and how to choose a right tree for your site. So with all that being said, there's a lot of things that we can do, but insects are still out there playing really important roles in our forests, making sure that a lot of these issues that could be issues aren't issues. So that's what I like to call the good, right? So we've already alluded to the natural enemies already. There's 3 general types of natural enemies that can help keep pest populations low. The first are predators. So these are some pictures of a few predators there: an assassin bug, a ladybug beetle, and a lacewing. These all feed on what we generally consider pest insects. They consume them wholly. Another type of insects are parasites. So this is actually an Ichneumon wasp, which is actually a type of parasite, which is called a parasitoid. There are many different types, but these are another type of insect where instead of feeding on the insect wholly, like we think of, a predator and a prey relationship, they actually utilize it much like a parasite, but many of them kill their hosts on the way out. And then the last would be pathogens. So basically diseases that cause a problem in the population so that pest populations don't build up. So kind of easy to remember with the 3 Ps. Now, quick examples in the forest setting about how the good guys, these natural enemies, are playing roles. First with the hemlock woolly adelgid. So this is an invasive insect we've had in North Carolina for, since the late 1990s. And it was brought over accidentally on hemlock stalks, spread pretty quickly, even though it's this very small insect. It can spread on wind, it can spread on birds. We spread it in infested nursery stock, etc. But very tiny insect. If you flip over the leaves of hemlock trees, you can see the woolly masses there. And then within that woolly mass is a very tiny adelgid using its piercing sucking mouth parts. They feed on the storage cells within the hemlocks. And then the hemlock trees die over a period of several years, sometimes as quick as 3 to 4 years, sometimes as long as 10 years. You can see they have caused devastating impacts for our ecosystems in the mountains of North Carolina. That image that you see there on the left, all of those great trees are dead hemlock trees. Now, if you remember, this is the tree that I referred to as a keystone species earlier. So these ecosystems are changing. The foliage drop, the needle drop from hemlocks isn't happening. So we're seeing pH changes in the soil and streams. We're seeing stream temperatures rise. We're seeing, the whole ecosystems just changing from this. There are some natural enemies that are feeding on adelgids, many of which we have introduced intentionally through classical biological control programs. So this image right here on the right is you can see a small Laricobius beetle getting through that woolly mass and feeding on the adelgid beneath that mass. Parasitoids, which is a type of parasite, we have been using to combat the emerald ash borer. So very similarly, the emerald ash borer is an insect we first found in North Carolina in 2013, and now we know it's in over 60 counties in our SIG. 99.9% of ash die from the emerald ash borer. Ash trees can be protected by pesticides, and if they're not, we expect many of them to die. However, we are not just, sitting by. We do want to see some long-term management. And one of the things that we've implemented for that is through a national program. USDA APHIS is running this Emerald Ash Borer Biological Control Program. Again, another classical biological control program, meaning we import the natural enemies from the native range of the pest. You can see one of the 4 species of parasitoid wasps that we release there on the right. So basically, this wasp seeks out the emerald ash borer larvae under the bark. They use their ovipositor to drill through the bark. They lay their egg on the emerald ash borer larvae, and then those parasitoids feed on and consume the larva, so it never becomes an adult emerald ash borer. So pretty cool system, pretty violent, really, when you think about it, but has been effective as far as becoming established. And we hope it becomes effective, but we just don't know yet. It's still too early to tell the impact that it will have. A good example of pathogens at play when it comes to forest pests is with spongy moth, the pest previously known as gypsy moth. There was a name change. There are 2 pathogens that actually cause issue in populations of spongy moth. One is the NPV virus, which is a naturally occurring virus, spreads rapidly through populations, and we actually use this to our advantage when we see really high populations of this insect pop up. We may basically cause an epidemic to occur within the spongy moth, so then their populations plummet. Another interesting phenomenon is this fungus on the right. So this is an entomophaga fungus, and it was originally from Japan, and it was introduced over many years in the US. But really didn't do much for many years. I think their first releases went back to the early 1900s, trying to combat this pest, which we've had since the 1860s. So we've been releasing this fungus pathogen, and it killed spongy moth. But it wasn't until like the 1980s where all of a sudden this fungus came out of nowhere and suddenly started causing these epidemics and really became an effective biological control. We can't fully explain how that happened, but we know it can be very effective. And between those 2 things, those are 2 pathogens, in addition to other tools we have in the toolbox, that have helped to keep spongy moth populations low. So when it comes to biological control, whether it be a predator, a parasitoid, or a pathogen, we have different options for how we want to incorporate those natural enemies into our systems. So one I've already mentioned is classical biological control. And that is when you go to the native range of an invasive pest, you figure out what is killing the invasive pest in its native range, and then you bring them over to the new range and release them there. Now, we don't release them willy-nilly. I think there's been many lessons learned over time using this system. If you want to use a case example with the emerald ash borer, for example, when we started back in the early 2000s, when emerald ash borer was first found, a team of scientists went over to China. They started, trying to look for the natural enemies that keep the populations of emerald ash borer low there, because emerald ash borer is not a problem, is not a pest in its native range. They found 12 species of parasitoid wasps. They brought those back over to the US. Those were kept in quarantine for years. And at this point, only 4 of those 12 species have been approved for release. And that's after extensive testing, make sure that 1, they would do well in our environment here, but 2, that they wouldn't start attacking our native species and become a bigger problem than we intended. And we want it to be a solution and not a problem itself. There are other 2 types of biological control, which is augmentative biological control. And that's when you have a species already in the environment, but you introduce more of them. So you release more of a native predator, for example. One a good example might be if you want to release green lacewings in an area where green lacewings are native, just so that they can help keep a pest population low, or treat it as almost like a pesticide application. Another method is conservative biological control, where you basically modify your practices by reducing pesticide or making sure there's habitat or overwintering sites for your biological control agents, and you conserve the ones that are already in the system. So you're not actually introducing new agents into a system. Now, the whole point when we want biological control agents to be a part of the system and help keep our forests healthy is that they keep the populations at an equilibrium. We don't want the pest populations to ever reach too high where they reach the economic injury level where damage occurs. We want to keep it below those levels. And typically that's what happens when we have a native species with a native natural enemy. But obviously things do happen. Pests do become a problem, whether it be an environmental perfect storm where for some reason we have an outbreak any given year, or the natural enemies, suddenly crash. So then we have a pest population. A lot of times people do want to do something about a pest if those pest populations build up, whether it be on their crops. I tend to see it in the forest setting because people in a lot of cases don't want large acreage of forest to die. So when you see an outbreak, it can be very concerning. But one of the things that we like to remind people is not to run to pesticides. The thought of indiscriminate spraying has caused issues in the past. Is basically the premise of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, published back in the 1960s, credited for starting the Green Revolution and subsequently integrated pest management. But there's also a lot of cases out there where broad spectrum or indiscriminate spraying has done very bad things and actually allowed pests to do a lot better than we think, whether it be to whether it's contaminating the honeydew, whether it facilitated secondary pest outbreaks. If you just indiscriminately spray insecticides, we see more and more problems pop up. So when I'm consulted on an issue like this, what I always like to try to remind people is that just because you see a pest becoming a problem, you see the populations building, does not mean to run to pesticides. The red-headed pine sawfly is a really good example of that. We see these pop up every once in a while. They're typically on newly planted pines. So people are really concerned because the pines they just spent a lot of money on to plant are suddenly attacked by these insects. It doesn't help that these feed in these clusters. So you see a whole bunch of feeding on one tree and it's almost completely defoliated, and then none on this tree over here. So people see red-headed pine sawfly and often immediately want to spray it. The problem is by the time they notice red-headed pine sawfly, they're in a later stage of development, so pesticides aren't as effective, and they're about to pupate anyway, so the damage has been done. So in a case like this, we typically recommend to someone, hey, this isn't something where you need to run and get your backpack sprayer right now. Monitor these populations next year. Maybe the natural enemies will come back and keep the populations low. That's typically what happens. But if they don't, get them when they're young and susceptible to the pesticides and before the damage occurs. So pesticides are a valuable tool, and I'm not knocking them that way, but it's very important not to use them indiscriminately. Another really, really important thing when it comes to managing, a pest population buildup is to know what you're dealing with. I often, like to remind people that the very first step of managing a pest is to know what pest you're dealing with. Now, this is a little timely with Christmas right around the corner, but you need to identify what insect you're dealing with before you know what tools are even available to you. But not everyone's an entomologist, and I get that. Not everyone has the experience under them, the degrees in identifying insects. So I want to kind of share some resources that are available to you, available publicly to you, to help you identify what some of these tree pests might be. One of the first tips I like to recommend to people is to stay in the know. What are the current issues on our trees? What are the new invasives? What are they attacking? You know, we haven't had a new invasive detected last year, the elm zigzag sawfly. So if someone were to see, you know, a zigzag pattern on their elm leaves, if they were staying up to date with the forest health issues, then they might be like, I know exactly what this is. So those with forest land who, you know, want to, you know, stay on top of their forest health issues, I highly recommend following some of these pages. The NC State's Forest Health page, which is my own page, with my colleague, Dr. Robert Chaton. We post timely things, if there's outbreaks, up and coming things, new solutions, new management tools, things like that. NC State Extension Forestry as well. The NC Forest Service also has a Facebook page. They often blog, and that's in conjunction with NCDA and CS. So if if the Forest Service is blogging with, hey, we have a bad outbreak of XYZ beetle this year, then you might know about it if you are following these pages, and you would know exactly what to do and who to contact about it. There are often blogs posted as well. So here's a few to check out if you're interested. One is our Extension Forestry page, and the other is NCDA and CS's Forestry Files blog. So that one, but they are both very timely. We like to put up if there are any current issues. But if you're not following those, if you're not on social media, there are some resources. Well, these are some social media resources available to you. One is, you know, if you continually deal with tree health issues, there's a diagnostic page with a lot of professionals on it, a lot of experts. Myself and many colleagues are on this page, and people basically join this page. They post pictures of their trees and they say, what is going on? And then people chime in. We have arborists, we have foresters, we have people from almost I think every state in the Southeast who can chime in with what might be causing issues on your tree. I've used it myself at some point when I've got an issue that has stumped me. So that is the Southern Forest and Tree Health Diagnostics page. Another thing I like to share if you're not already using iNaturalist is iNaturalist. It can be another valuable tool. If you post observations, here's just a screenshot of my own observations, then people will look and help you identify some issues that you might have, especially if it's a common one. But when you see multiple people suggesting the same identification, that can be another tool and help you like, I think this is red-headed pine sawfly, but if 3 people agree with me on iNaturalist, then that might solidify your ID for you. So just for example, here's a leaf beetle right here. I just put in the genus, and then someone, I think it was the same day or next day, confirmed what I was suspecting that it was, and confirmed that ID. There are other resources available to you. This is almost a resource overload, so I hope you're ready for it. We also have a plethora of fact sheets available online through NC State Extension. Now, these do work a lot better if you know the species you're dealing with, because then you could just look up emerald ash borer. And I know that's not always the case, but those are there, and almost every single pest species that you might be dealing with has a fact sheet through NC State Extension. But there are a few pages that I've worked with a student previously on where it's common pests of oaks, for example, and you can actually scroll through the many different pictures of the things we see most common on oaks. It's not a comprehensive list. Obviously, there are a million different things that could happen to an oak tree, but it's the ones we encounter the most. So those fact sheets might be helpful for you too. Another really good resource is the North Carolina Forest Service Forest Health Handbook. There's a link right there. But honestly, if you just Googled NCFS Forest Health Handbook, it would pop up. It's available as a free PDF. This is a book that I worked on and edited when I was with the North Carolina Forest Service, and very similar to the fact sheets, it has just a list of the very common insects and diseases that might impact trees in North Carolina. Now, I will say this is one that you could flip through and look for pictures of what's causing issues to your tree. Each issue has an entire page of text with a comprehensive like life cycle, signs and symptoms, management, where it can be found in the state, things like that. And it's paired with an entire page of images, beautiful color images that show all the different things to look for when it comes to all of these different things that could impact your tree health. So I highly, highly, highly recommend the Forest Health Handbook. And there's also the Southern Regional Extension Forestry website that has a pest portion of it that can help you identify issues on your tree. And then if you just want to get more educated, I recommend using forestrywebinars.net. There's a whole catalog of hundreds, maybe even thousands of webinars dealing with tree issues. There's a lot of tree health issues. So this is just if you want to sit down and hear, I've given a few of these myself. If you want to hear people talk for 30 minutes, in some cases an hour, in many cases, and deep dive into an issue, that resource is available for you as well. But if you have looked at all these things, or if you just want to talk to someone, there are people resources as well here in North Carolina, and not enough people know about these. So in every county in the state, there is a North Carolina Forest Service County Ranger. We also have county extension agents associated with the cooperative extension, who I work with a lot. So in every county, you have both extension agents and Forest Service rangers, county rangers that you can contact. If you want to contract someone and hire a professional for urban trees or landscape trees, single tree issues, I would recommend using a certified arborist, an ISA certified arborist. And if you want someone who can help you with your forest land or timber, use a consulting forester for that issue. There's also the PDIC. Dr. Matt Bertone said he was going to be jumping on, so I bet he didn't know he was going to get a shout out here. But most states have a pest identification lab. Ours is housed at NC State here in North Carolina. I highly recommend going through your extension office to go this route, though, and help with your insect or disease ID. And that's because a lot of times your extension agent might know what's going on, but they also have a direct line to the PDIC, and you would get a discounted rate on submissions if you work through your extension office. So I highly recommend that. On top of all of those resources, having an extension program, one of the things I like to do is spread awareness for the incoming species du jour, I guess you could say. So the two that are biggest on our radar in North Carolina right now are the spotted lanternfly, which is the one on the left there. We do have it at one site in North Carolina. It's on the edge of Forsyth and Guilford County. It has not grown in the past year and a half since we found it. We have not added any additional sites in North Carolina. The one on the right is the Asian longhorn beetle. We do not have this in North Carolina as of yet. The closest sites are in South Carolina near Charleston and Ohio. But either way, I am spreading the word about this. This is one where if you see either of these species, we want to know about it. So the earlier we know about it, the better chances we have of actually eradicating and or doing some kind of management option against these pests. So check out our website, poolsidepest.com, to learn more about those two insects. We call it poolside pests. These insects can be found anywhere. They're outside insects with a very wide host range, both of them. But for some reason, they are also attracted to water. So much so where places where there's large spotted lanternfly infestations, people have literally set out dishes of soapy water as traps for spotted lanternfly. But to that end, people who have pools have also found these in their skimmers or filters. So we're using that angle as well, but also using it to attract the attention of the general public to keep an eye out for these two insects and report them if they see them. So all that being said, keeping our forest healthy is basically a team effort. There are many of us, doing research, doing extension, trying to consult one-on-one. But what can you do with your land? Look at your trees often so that you notice changes if they happen. Stay plugged into what's going on. What are the new issues? What are the up and coming issues? If there's a new invasive that attacks a certain tree and you have that tree, be aware of that so that you can know what options might be available to you. Always, always, always identify the pests first before you try to implement any kind of management, and then seek all of those resources that I just shared. There's a lot of people who are more than happy and willing to help you figure out what's going on. We're all wanting our forests to stay healthy. So just know what's available to you. And with that, I'll leave you with a pretty comical, or in my opinion anyway, biological control comic where ladybugs look so calm and peaceful, but really they're just tearing apart aphids. My contact information is there, social media. If you'd like to follow, is listed there too, my Twitter and Facebook. Well, X now, right? But with that, I will take any questions that anyone might have.
Well, everybody, let's give Dr. Kelly Oten a great big round of applause wherever you happen to be. Maybe there's people on NC State. You can hear the clapping in the distance. Thanks for being here today. This was incredible. Great stuff.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. There's kind of a buzz on campus. I think a lot of people are nearing the end of their semester, but also it's Thanksgiving next week. So kind of exciting around here.
Oh my gosh, you said there's a buzz on campus. Okay.
I told you I like bugs. I warned you.
Excellent. Like it. Okay, let me get some questions for you from the chat. Let's see what the people who are watching today are thinking about. And of course, viewers, if you've got questions, we've got several minutes here, so go ahead and drop your thoughts into the chat as well. We want to have plenty to talk about. So one of the first things that came in was from Kirsten, who mentioned that they've heard reports of insects decreasing, like people saying that they used to see so many fireflies in the summer, but now they don't. Are there studies that support those kind of statements?
Yes, there are. Most people think it's a result of reduced habitat and pesticide use. There's not, I'll be honest, I'm not as well versed in that literature, but I have seen some of those publications come out. I could, if you email me, Kirsten, Kelly_Oten@ncsu.edu, I can definitely share some of those resources and reading materials with you.
There you go. Next one for you. Does the emerald ash borer target all ash species, or does it primarily target white ash?
It can attack every species of North American ash that we have. The Asian species, primarily Manchurian ash, seem to have a little bit of resistance to it, in combination with some natural enemies in its native range. But as far as North America, all species of ash are attacked and killed.
So no matter what you've got, go check on it.
100%. And it used to be there were recommendations, if you know emerald ash borer is within 15 miles of a tree, to go ahead and start treating it. But those recommendations were when we were tracking it a lot more than we are now. So we don't have the same trapping levels that we once did. So I'm recommending anyone in North Carolina, if you have an ash tree and you want it to survive, to treat it with pesticides. And again, if you want specific recommendations for pesticides, shoot me an email, but there are two major recommendations that people have. The best being a stem injection of emamectin benzoate.
Excellent stuff. All right, let's see here. When importing additional species to control an invasive insect, how is it determined that imported species will not cause further damage to the ecosystem or become invasive?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Obviously, it's a huge concern, especially since some biological control issues have gone poorly in the past. So there are a lot of regulations as far as what they have to be tested against. The biggest thing are bringing in related species. So if there's any in the same genus or even same family that are native, they'll bring those in and make sure that the parasitoid won't hop from the pest that we're trying to kill to the other. So the ones that we've introduced for the emerald ash borer, for example, are species specific. They will not attack our other agrylus species in North America, which is good, right? We don't want that to happen. But the double-edged sword part of it is, if the emerald ash borer populations plummet, then so do our natural enemies that we've worked so hard to established. But even so, we don't want to cause more of a problem than we have. So primarily is, testing to make sure they're not going to go after our native species, especially those that are related. And anytime a species is approved for release, all of that testing that they've done, the assessment is posted publicly. So you could literally look up Emerald Ash for biological control assessments. You could pull up some government forms. So if you need to fall asleep at night, you can pull that up and start reading, but it is posted publicly. So you can see all of that information.
There you go. All right. What are some other ways individuals can help with forest health, even if they don't farm or manage trees?
That's a really good question. So it kind of depends based on, a case by case scenario. If you're working on your own lands, one of the best things we recommend is management. People sometimes think leaving the forest alone is better for the ecosystems, but we have shown or we see all too often it's the forests that aren't managed that are the least healthy. And there's obviously other disturbances that can come in, but we have southern pine beetle, which we see cyclical outbreaks of in the southeast. We have not seen an outbreak of it in North Carolina since the early 2000s. We've had a spot here and there, individual, spots in a county, but we have not seen an outbreak level problem in so long. And we think that's primarily because private landowners are managing their forests really well. And it's where the outbreaks do occur are primarily on unmanaged forests. So making sure there's proper stocking density, making sure that just your forest is able to maintain whatever your land management objective is. It will vary case by case, so it's hard to put a blanket statement on that. But forest management is the best thing to prevent these issues from happening in the first place.
And when they need tips and tricks on forest management, they can head to all of the resources that you shared with us.
The many resources. I know it was a lot, but that's, so many people don't know where to go. Like I don't know how many people I've talked to who are like, don't even know that there was an extension service. So just making sure that people have the tools available to them. You don't have to know everything. You just have to know where to go to get the answers.
That's so true. And all of the links, most of the links, I think, we dropped them into the chat.
Awesome. So thank you for doing that.
Program, they can just click right through to get all of the information that they need. And yeah, take advantage of those things and be a part of the solution.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's see here. Kelly, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Excellent job. Learned a lot of stuff. Everybody, a bunch of viewers in the chat, we're all dropping clapping hands emojis for you.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And folks, we'll be back here again next Wednesday at noon with another edition of the program. No, excuse me. We'll be back here in 2 weeks. Next Wednesday is awfully close to a holiday, so we won't be here. We'll be back here 2 Wednesdays from now. So don't miss out. Whether I give you the right dates or not, you can make sure you get the right information by heading to eenorthcarolina.org, which is the website for the Office of Environmental Education, or naturalsciences.org, which is the museum's website. There we've got calendars of events and information about upcoming lecture programs and the link to come and join us. And of course, you can always follow everybody on the social media. You got the Kelly's stuff there in the talk today about how to get in touch with the forest health resources, but you've also got the museum and the Office of Environmental Education. It's real easy. Just give us a Google or head to our website and then click through and go and follow us. Because in addition to all stuff like this, we all doing pretty cool stuff out there in science and nature here in North Carolina. So great resources all the way around. Just, good stuff for your feeds every single day. So I hope that you'll do that. Until next time, everybody, if you're celebrating, have a great holiday next week. I won't see you, so enjoy your days off, perhaps, I hope. And I'll see you again here real soon. Bye, everybody.